Okay, we are ready to start now. Привет, друзья! Снова в прямом эфире Лера, продюсер Disrupt Marketing Conference и конференции DMC. У меня в гостях сегодня Gerard Crichlow, невероятно крутой эксперт по культурной стратегии, экс-сотрудник AMV BBDO. До этого он работал с Droga 5 и RGA. Для тех, кто не знает, это одни из самых крутых, инновационных, креативных и дизайн-компаний на рекламном рынке во всем мире. Мы, конечно, узнаем у Джерарда, как ему удалось поработать в таких трех гигантах, и зададим ему все самые интересные вопросы. Вы можете тоже задавать вопросы в чатике. Ну, а мы будем начинать. Hi, Gerard, how are you?
Great. It's good to be here. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. We just had a little chat before this, so I know how you are, but tell to our audience what's going on in London. How are things there?
Yeah, I mean, the world is a little bit upside down, right? And so everyone is just trying to figure out this new normal of life, work. It's all converging at the same place. But I think the good thing about London is everyone is kind of resilient and sort of like puts their head down, gets their tea, and just carries on with it. So yeah, it's a real thing, and I'm pretty optimistic about when we come together with the great things that we could do.
Do people still have their 5 o'clock tea? Do you have 5 o'clock tea?
Oh, I'm drinking tea right now as we speak. It's like, it's part of being in London. You got to have your tea.
All right. So cheers for your tea.
Yeah. To tea, yeah.
So I saw the post on your Instagram about your wife who spends 18 hours a day saving lives around the COVID situation. And I would like to thank her and everybody who spends all their time and risk their lives to save other people's lives. And I hope everybody will stay fine as much as it's possible. And we will get out of this in the most perfect way that we can. And I wanted to ask you, as you are almost in the front row of this everyday dramatic scenario and you see almost everything with your wife's eyes, could you maybe share some, let's say, thoughts or feelings that you got, how it evolved during the whole process and during these 3 months? And do you feel any changes in yourself and in people around you? How do you feel about it?
Yeah, I mean, so for the background for the viewers, my wife's a crisis manager. And I think when you start to see the numbers of people who are unemployed and are losing not only their jobs, but are losing their lives, lots of questions start to spring up of how are you going to support yourself? How are you going to keep yourself healthy? And unfortunately, the type of work that my wife is involved in is the type of work that no one ever sees, but she always gets sort of like the bad stuff as she works in crisis. And so I think like when we start to deal with it now, it's how do you answer those questions around trust and who you can trust and what's the real information that's out there, which is not that dissimilar to the line of work that I'm in, is to build trust with people, give them sort of inspiration to feel a certain way. And then how does the role of brands in society today, not just of how they can help people, but how they can move the world forward. So I think like it's an interesting time that we're all feeling lots of different questions, but perhaps this is the exact impetus that we needed in order to behave and do things actually as we should.
So you feel pretty optimistic right now, as far as I can hear from your voice.
I think so. I mean, the other option is to just like be depressed and watch the news all the time and just put your hand in the sand. And that doesn't feel like very much fun, does it? So I think, things that I've been learning from this experience is that learning a lot about myself in particular, about the way I work, what's important to me in terms of my values, what's the future look like for me. I think, when we have our daily routine and we get used to doing certain things, we tend to not put our head above the parapet and look at the bigger picture. I think this is unfortunately a great time for us to actually slow down, take a breath, look at the whole field, and see where do we see ourselves on that field and what role do we want to play. Because perhaps maybe we're one position now, and maybe the things that we really love, the things that we really want to do, we can get one step closer to that.
Well, you're right. It's a great chance to reinvent yourself and everything around you. Basically, to reinvent living on Earth. So tell me, how are you adjusting to a new reality? Do you already have like new rules or new schedules? I know that everything have changed, but what exactly?
I mean, my Netflix consumption and my Amazon Prime consumption through the roof. It's insane. I definitely eat way more than I used to. I'm probably a few pounds heavier than I used to be as well.
High five.
Yeah, I'm eating my feelings. Right? It's a great thing. But I think like the things that are new realities is really self-care for myself. I didn't really take great care of myself, or didn't really carve out that time, and I started to do yoga more, and I'm doing much more walks in nature, which is wonderful because London is now considered sort of a green city, and so there's lots of, fortunately, urban spaces but green places to go. And I think I found that I do my best thinking. I can calm myself down when I take myself for a walk and breathe in fresh air and take things out. Actually, to do that, to slow down, I can speed up a lot more, and I'm much more efficient in that way, which is kind of a new learning for me, and a good one.
That's a nice one, actually. So let's get away from the topic, and I actually want to ask you about something else, because it's a pretty much interesting topic for a lot of people who asked us. I want to ask you about your moving from US to UK. It was some time ago, but still, I think you can remember that. How it started? What was the beginning of this story? How did you decide to do it, and why? And was it hard? Can you dive into that story a little bit?
Yeah. I'll hit you with the headlines. So I'm a native New Yorker, born and raised in New York. I took a brief break by going to college or university in Washington, D.C., so both urban areas. And as soon as I graduated from university, in a tough market, I went into PR. And I always wanted to be in advertising, but never could. And I think the whole point of the things that I've done, I've went from PR to a digital agency, and then to a boutique agency at the time, and then moved over to London. And I think the red line of that journey is that I've always wanted to get farther up the marketing funnel. And I think any good marketer or who knows brand and can tell a story has a bigger view of the world, and you kind of have to take yourself out of your comfort zone in order to begin to see different perspectives. And I was feeling that living in New York in an urban center is a bit biased in a sense, and I needed to get out of New York in order to see and experience something different, and I think that would help my work. So when AMV came and they reached out to me, they knew I was working within social media, and they had a great social media department, but it wasn't necessarily as well known in terms of their work. And they said, could you do some of the great things that you were doing, that you're in New York here? And that was interesting to me, but they're like, but we also have this company that we're working with called Sparks and Honey, which I'm not sure if you guys have heard of them or know much about them, but I didn't at the time. I was like, what a crazy name, Sparks and Honey, what's that? Tell me more. And they were like, yeah, they're a cultural intelligence agency. And I'm like, oh, okay, so that sounds interesting. Yeah, and they didn't have a footprint in Europe, and they wanted to grow their footprint. And they're saying, could you begin to grow that footprint in addition to managing, looking after the social media team? So for me, that sounded like the perfect opportunity to not be a New York douchebag, and then come work at an agency with great heritage and stories, that I could shape. And that's kind of like how I got to London. Yeah.
Okay, I have to disagree with you. You were never a New York douchebag.
Oh, I hide it well then, yeah.
Okay, you know how to do it. You New Yorkers know how to do that.
I guess so. You know, the funny thing about being in London is like, you know, you're from the States, you know, we all speak English, but when you get to London, you're speaking the same language, but you're not saying the same thing. So it was quite frustrating at the beginning.
Interesting.
Oh man, yeah. Culturally, it's much farther apart than you would think in terms of business workings or like sort of humor, what works and what translates, how you get things done. Just a different way of life, which I think is a great learning experience for anyone. If you are fortunate enough to get out of where you're from and go somewhere else, so that's where I think you begin to like spread your wings and become more of who you are.
I really heard that UK jokes are not the same as the US, but speaking about when you speak the same language, but you don't say the same things, can you maybe give an example just to understand what you mean about this? Like in what way?
Like, that's a good question. So like if in the States, you know, we're very like, you get to a meeting and they're like, you got 10 minutes, go, right, we're about business, like things are happening, right? Time is of an essence, we're busy, especially being New Yorkers. When you're in London, you come, you sit down, you have your tea, you talk about your lives or what's going on. That's like at least the first 15-20 minutes of a meeting. And then you have the meeting, right? So like for me, I was like, okay, so this is what it is, right? And that doesn't necessarily work when you have clients who are like, well, they didn't ask about my day and all this, and you're like, what? I don't even know what you're saying. Why do we need to do that? We're wasting time, right? So that's like one thing. The other thing is like, for instance, like if you get feedback in a creative meeting or a review, usually you say, here's your feedback, and the client gives feedback and that's it. I think in London, it's a little bit different. They'll say, yeah, we absolutely loved it. And then you'll get an email saying that was the worst thing I've ever seen, right? So
really?
Yeah, and I think that's not that dissimilar in other places. Like Amsterdam is a little bit more straightforward, right? Copenhagen and like Sweden are probably a little bit closer to that. So it's a different way of working. You kind of have to. It's not what they say in the meeting; it's what they say in the hallways. Is actually what they think, and that was a learning experience as well. Yeah.
Okay, that's a good thing to know about Londoners. So as you said,
and that's just my perspective.
And as you said, you always wanted to work in advertising, but how did you come to the profession that you do now? How did you become a cultural strategist? Because for Russian market it's not an obvious career, let's say.
Yeah, so it's not necessarily, when I was doing it, it wasn't necessarily even a title that I knew of, or that many other people that ever had it. But I think when you start to look back and look at the zeitgeist of what was happening in the world, when you started to see like the work like Kendall Jenner and fashion brands that were just culturally insensitive and losing money as a result of that, you really started to see that like the way to build a brand may not necessarily be the same way that it was before. There might be another way to do it. And so my perspective was that instead of shouting at people, because we had mass reach channels, now that we have social media and other places where people can voice and experience things, perhaps the best way to build a brand was from sort of the ground floor, not the top floor. And we needed to be culture out to the people rather than the brand out. And so while I was doing social media and working with Sparks and Honey, you begin to see signals. And the way I used to describe my job was I'm more of like a stockbroker for sort of culture. And I'm looking at kind of what are the issues that are constantly bubbling or in and out of the world. And then taking those issues, so let's say like, let's think about toxic masculinity or empathy or what's going on with the green movement, what's going on in health and healthcare and wellness, and then start to match brands to those particular topics depending on each brand's point of view. And then say, this is what your brand campaign should look like. These are the influencers you should be talking to. These are types of music you should be exploring, right? Maybe these are some channels that you're not in right now, but man, there's this great communities that are bubbling up that you should really be aware of. And you can then to say, we can build your brand from understanding that landscape rather than just saying we want to sell some shit to more people that don't want any more of that stuff, right? So in my job, I didn't even come up with the title. I was really lucky to work for a company where the CEO, Ian, and the managing director, Johnny, were like, oh man, this is actually what you do. Like, let's give it a name. And so they helped me get there. I wouldn't have gotten there on my own. And so with their help, and they gave me the runway, they said, go do this thing. And so that's how we got the title of cultural strategist, and we started a department and started to find the clients who really wanted to work in a different way.
So there is no any university of cultural strategists, right? you just made.
I think there is now. Yeah, I think now there are probably courses you could do that. There's books from a Harvard professor on being culture first and strategy. But when I started, there wasn't. So it's not like I was formally trained in this sphere.
Well, let's fantasize a little bit. If you were not a strategist and you were not working with cultural issues, what would you do? What would be your another career, let's say?
I think I would be sort of two things. I'd probably be like a journalist. Like I want to travel and tell stories and find interesting things and just interview and talk to interesting people and basically write down what I found. I'd probably be a terrible one, but a teacher, and sort of like, here's what I've learned and here's how you two can learn it. So I think that's basically what I do now anyway. So like that's, yeah, telling stories and teaching people about things is that's kind of the job. And yeah.
Well, I actually remember that you had a series of LinkedIn lectures or something like this. It was a year ago, as far as I remember. How did you come up with this one? I mean, you decided to try yourself in new job, or it was just for sharing the knowledge?
Yeah, well, as we were mentioning before, when we were just talking, it's like cultural strategy wasn't necessarily like a division, or I didn't know that many other people doing it. And so I wanted to kind of test what I was working on and share it with other people for their own feedback, almost like thinking in beta mode every time to say, hey, here's what I'm doing. I think there's some merit here. I'd love to share it with other people and see if if it's helpful to them, and if they could build on what I'm doing. And so I had a friend who worked at LinkedIn Learning, which had bought up lynda.com, and they were saying, look, we want to get more people into sort of the sort of advertising, creative other field. Would you be interested in doing a talk? And I was like, yeah, that sounds amazing. So we designed a course and we put it together. I went out to LA to their studios to shoot it, which is also part of the new experience. I wanted a new experience of how do you teach a class online and shoot it in a studio. It's totally different than just like standing up in front of an audience and presenting, because you have a teleprompter and you have all these cameras in front of you, you have a green screen. And so how you tell the story actually functionally format wise is completely different. And so that was a really cool experience. Just for that alone, I think it was well worth it.
Well, that's actually what we are trying to do in Russia right now. We are opening the school. We don't have that kind of coverage audience-wise, but that's what we are doing. We are putting more people into creative profession, and let's see how it goes for us. And we would be happy to see you in our place to try this. I would like also to ask you one interesting question for me, and I ask it everybody. If you had one thing to change in your life, would you do it, and what would it be, if yes?
One thing that changed in my life. I'd say In what way? Like, what do you mean? Like a personality trait, or like where I live?
Anything. I mean, anything. Maybe when you were a 12-year guy, you were, I don't know, you were not behaving well and you want to change it. Would you do that?
Yeah. Oh,
Anything.
well, right now, as we're sort of under, sort of lockdown, I would see more of the world. I would literally put myself in more positions of vulnerability to learn from other cultures and sample those things. Because right now it's like, oh man, I wish I did that. I wish I did that. And I don't want to have any regrets anymore, right? So I would really love to begin to have traveled when I was younger. I think it would have definitely have shaped my perspectives, even my food taste. Who knows? But that's not necessarily a massive regret. It's like, that's something I'd like to do more of. Yeah.
And we will have a chance to do it, I hope.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, that's something that cheers me up every day. That's what I think about, that, yeah, one day I'm going to sit on the plane and I'm going to travel somewhere.
Yeah. And close my eyes and look at the map and say, that's where I'm going to go. And that's what will happen. Yeah.
So that's your way of cheering yourself up, or you have other ways besides yoga, let's say? What do you do to cheer yourself up?
Yeah. Well, I'm terrible at yoga, first of all, so I don't know if it's cheering anyone up, but it hurts. But I think like the walks have been really, really helpful for me. Just like I put on a podcast. I've been really exploring different types of podcasts. If I can't travel now, the best way for me to travel would be like to get in another world, which would be books or movies or podcasts. And so I've been doing my walks and then throwing on podcasts just to learn about other things. And as I'd left AMV not too long ago, which is the London agency I was in, after I left, I was really interested in just like, who are the most innovative people out there? What are they doing? And like how can I like learn from them, right? And so I went and shadowed a bunch of people in just different industries, and sort of like theater makers, like that make the actual theater, creative directors in a theater, architectural firms, design shops, and just to learn from like, what does innovation look like? And I think that was such an interesting sort of experience for me, that like, yeah, that's been really like lifting my mood and taking me out of my own mind and circumstances to understand the bigger playing field.
Well, that sounds pretty inspiring. That's the thing to do for me. That's what I should do. Okay, write it down.
Yeah.
So from cheerful thing to even more cheerful thing, there is another question that I ask everybody, and everybody tells all the funny stories that they have, and I hope you're gonna do too. Can you tell us about one of your tremendous fuck-ups that you had in work or in life?
Yeah. I guess a work fuck-up would be like, I was quite new to an agency I was working at. My first big meeting with the client, I prepared, I had done all this stuff. I had gone through the routes with everyone. And then the client came in, I'd never met before. It was 3 of them. And I guess he was just kind of like a diva in a sense, just like, get me a coffee, do this, do that. Did you have my order? And I was like, oh, I've never ever, is this what advertising is like? Oh my God. And then I was going through the presentation, and he was kind of doing one of these like, yeah, speed it up, yeah. And it kind of threw me off my game, and I was no longer like ready to present. I was just completely like thrown off. So that was probably like one of the worst experiences that I've ever had, like presenting work or in front of a client. And the lesson I learned from that was never let anyone else speed you up. If you have something to say and you have a point of view to share, take your time and do that. Share that with other people, no matter how impatient, because you've spent a lot of time working on this on their behalf, and they should give you the respect and the time to do it. So don't let other people throw you off. So that was like, yeah, that was my one of the major, but there's probably lots more, but that's the one that kind of stands out. Yeah.
Was it at the start of the career, or it was when it happened? It's like, I'm just
I
interested
was like
because,
in the
yeah, you go.
Oh, it was in the middle of my career. I think because I wasn't always in advertising, I was in PR, and I was in PR for a long time, which is kind of like a night and day culture. PR is much more corporate. I'd say the big difference is PR is all about sort of what can't you do, right? What should you not say? Whereas like advertising is more about possibilities and dreaming. What is possible? What might we do? How do you feel, right? And they're sort of like code switching mindsets and cultures in a sense, and so like they're very different, and so how you present and what you talk about, they're definitely not the same, and not the same ways of doing it. So yeah, it was like sort of in the middle. I only got into advertising through a program that was meant for people of color in the States who wanted to go from one industry to another, because it was very hard for us to break in. And I was lucky enough to be the first to do it in that program. And then I had to like learn everything all over again. So I was behind everyone else. And so that's partly why I was so like taken aback. I'd never seen clients like that. No.
Now I think you have seen all the types of clients already.
Yeah, I've seen my share. Yeah.
So you've worked with RJ at the start. No, it wasn't the start, but still, you worked with RJ, Droga 5, and AMV BBDO. For Russian market, it's pretty much one of the top agencies that people want to work at one day. It's like the dream places to work at. And how can you explain? Is it some secret? How did you manage to work in 3 of them?
Oh, 3. Oh, yeah. Yeah, so like I mentioned, coming from PR and then going into a place like RGA, I'd say like the culture at RGA is more like a university, and it's all very collaborative, very design oriented, and it's kind of like Kleiner Perkins, sort of San Francisco tech design, and how big can we get before we get really good, right? And I think that was like the university, like it was like if I didn't go to university, this was actually in my real education, right? And so I learned about design thinking and how to the execution of your work is just as important as the thinking of the work itself, because if it looks shitty, people are going to think it's shitty, even if it's not shitty, you know.
Yeah.
So it's got to be beautiful, but it's got to be smart. And RJ, Bob, who's the founder, was a very big proponent, and he like drilled that home in the teams. Whereas I say like Droga 5 is much more less Kleiner Perkins, more like Hollywood Boulevard in a sense, right? And they're into big ideas. And I'd say like if I give you examples of C's, RGA is about canvases and building things and filling those canvases. Droga 5, Hollywood Boulevard is more about context. And so like David would say, why would anyone give a shit about what we're doing, right? Like if it's not interesting or cool, it's not making a difference. And so you had a bunch of people who were in advertising, but kind of hated advertising, wanted to change it. And then also wanted to make it cool, which is like perfect for me, right? Because like wasn't in advertising. The reason why I got into advertising because I hated it. I definitely wanted to be in advertising to convey unrepresented stories, and share points of view that could be heard, right? And shine a light on those point of views. But I also love design. So RJ and Droga 5 are probably like my spiritual animals in terms of culture. And AMV was probably was very different because it was British, it was traditional. It's the biggest traditional agency I've ever worked at. So how you did things, the speed of things were different. But I'd say like it's all about the culture there. They've created 40 years of an agency. It's a hard thing to do. And they've really fostered an amazing culture internally, but also that's where I began to think about culture at large, and how you can begin to use the power of the mediums that we had to impact culture. And I think like the 3 of them all have strong cultures, but very different cultures. And you really have to navigate your way through those.
And you have to learn
way of
from
answering your question.
Well, I'll ask another one that maybe will help people that are watching us right now. What do you think the essential, let's say, skills for people who are now trying to get into advertising, or maybe working there and trying to get more higher positions, let's say? How should people think, and what should they do, and how should they behave?
Yeah. Well, I think you should behave like how you normally behave. Like, don't change yourself just for an organization. Like, the only way you're going to make it in these organizations is to literally be yourself and bring something to the table. So I think the main thing that like you need is to have a point of view as you walk in the door, no matter what that point of view is. Have one. Because guess what? Everyone is going to have one. If you cannot defend your point of view or sway others to why you think something, you're not going to make it. And so I think when a lot of the young people come in, the ones that really sort of begin to make their mark is the ones that automatically contribute to the conversation, and that tends to be they have a point of view. So I like people who are kind of like myself, of like have like a scraggly line in terms of their experiences and the things that they've done, because the people who have gone and done things and went interesting places, and some of them didn't make sense but somehow ended up here, have the best stories, but they also have the best life experiences. That means that they can contribute to something that we're doing, and as a result of that, are really much more empathetic about other people, so they can put themselves in other people's shoes to say why something perhaps makes the most sense. I think those two things about having a point of view and being empathetic and having some life experiences, I think, are the three things that are most essential for people who are looking to get into a career in advertising. But the other thing I'd say is, why do you want to be in advertising in the first place? Like, it's a crazy place to be in. Does it ads work anyway? Why would anyone want to be in advertising right now?
I think that's
Yeah.
why everybody wants to get there. It's crazy, and they love it. So I would like to dive a little bit deep into the work that you've done with AMV BBDO. I'm talking about the Blood Normal campaign, which was, let's say, pretty eye-opening for a lot of people, especially in Russia. I think everywhere in the whole world. And I would like to talk, maybe you can share how you were standing at the beginning of the campaign, as far as I remember, the first part of Blood Normal. Can you maybe share a little bit about how it all started, how you got to the idea?
Yeah, I mean, so Blood Normal, a lot of people know about it. And it started first in 2015, and there's been several versions of that. We've done Blood Normal. It started with Live Fearless. They went to Blood Normal. Now it's Viva La Volva. I think it's probably one of the most awarded campaigns in the last few years, winning lots of different types of things. And I'd say for us, the awards, when I was working on it, and I'm not there now, but when we were working on it, the awards weren't necessarily the thing that was the driving force. It was really the chance to make a difference. And I think when the clients came to us, and it was called the breasts in some places or Essity in other places, what they asked for us is basically in the feminine hygiene sector, everyone was sort of talking the same, right? And they wanted to begin to shift sort of the messages from something that was more functional, where they showed like your periods, where they showed the pads and they were, stretching them, or they put the blue liquid to show the buoyancy of something. So they wanted to shift from that functional messaging and maybe something more humorous to something more about purpose, right? And so the real challenges that we had with the client was, how do you challenge women's perceptions of their periods from more of a place of weakness to one of strength? And so what we came up with was called Red Fit, which became Blood Normal. But the journey to get to that took probably a year, maybe a year and a half, of convincing the client why this is a great departure from where they've been, right? So while they had the appetite to say, make us something amazing, they were still had their own business goals. They still had a culture of conservatism in terms of marketing. They weren't really big marketing spenders. And I'd say that as the culture of the company, they historically they own lots of forest. And so they were making paper products, and they had transitioned from making sort of paper to sort of feminine hygiene and things like that. So you don't necessarily have a culture that's very well versed in marketing, right? And so when you start to show a controversial point of view, it's like, you know what we're going to do? We're going to talk about women's periods, and we want to like show blood. You have to make the case. And so making the case means that we went through rounds and rounds of concepting, showing different territories of the audience, which was where my role came in to say, here, this is a thing. If you look at women and menstruation and confidence and what's going on in the world in terms of work, you put all these things together, that means that there's a new point of view that we haven't necessarily talked about. And what could that mean for this brand? And then you kind of work with your creative directors and teams and other strategists to then build out the case for that. But that's kind of like where we started. And then you can see where it's evolved from then since 2015.
I have the question that actually it interests me for a long time, because what I've found out, there are a lot of campaigns that are aimed for women audience, and they are speaking about females insights, but they were created by men, and the strategists on the campaigns are also men, and most of the team are men. So how do men come up with females insights? Is there some special process? And vice versa,
Well,
of course, because
well, on the SCT or the breastwork, the team was actually mainly females, to be honest. The strategists were females. The lead strategists, the account people were females. There were actually men were in the minority on the account, and then the men who were on the account were some of the things that we talked about earlier, like were very empathetic around women. They had daughters, they had wives, they went through all these other things, and so they're quite heightened around that. And we're lucky to have had really good team members on that particular team that this mattered to them. But I'd say like the idea of having a point of view and putting yourselves in other people's shoes is the most important trait. So if you can do that, it makes the work a lot easier. So you hire people who are empathetic in that sense.
Maybe, do you think that's why these trends that are coming right now, the trends about diversity and inclusivity and equality, maybe that's why they are so popular right now? Because we are trying to, let's say, get into everybody's shoes, because there are categories of people that were never listened to and never even thought of. And right now it's kind of a huge trend to get everybody into the picture.
Yeah, I think sometimes when there are waves, people want to ride those waves, but I don't think sometimes like they're really on the boat because they want to be. I think a lot of times you have like corporations just trying to stem the tide. So there's a lot of lip service around diversity and like inclusivity and equality. And let's be honest, like the industry is not any of those things. But it is a commercial industry. And so commercially, if they can represent themselves that way, perhaps people will want them. That's why purpose is such a big deal now. And I think really like a lot of hot air, to be honest. Some are genuine, but most of the companies are kind of doing it because it'll help them sell more things. And that's like where the opportunities are, is to actually make those changes around those types of issues, right? And so I think what I'd like to see next is much more about going from sort of talking about the fluffiness of bringing more diverse people in and being more inclusive and putting themselves about equality, and actually like changing their actual board members and changing their policies, really not just in their companies, but in the government level, where corporations can actually have a really big impact on the world. And so the things I'm interested in is how to use corporate sort of muscle in order to move culture and other issues. And like, Emmanuel who's the head of Patagonia, says the way you change things is fun. First, you get the people, then you get the corporations, then you get the governments. And so right now we're seeing lots of people saying they really want this, which is why the companies are changing. And once those companies really and truly believe those things, we can get these policies changed as well.
Let's see how it works for us. I hope everything is going to work out. I also want to talk about the let's say, it's not a strategy, it's the mechanics that you got, the 3C, which you talk about. Can you dive deep into it? What's it about? How did you come up with this 3C?
Yeah, I mean, so some of it is where I'm not a traditionally trained strategist, and how I came up through strategies through the social media realm. And so for me, when you're building brands, you want to have culture, you want to be able commerce, you want to have community. And I think those three things are the ingredients that the most successful brands of today have, all of those ingredients. And I'd add a fourth C, and I'd say creativity. And so if you can understand culture, and you can understand the communities that are forming around those cultures, you'll be able to sell to them. And so you start to see things like the Glossier or Hint Water, or what Rihanna's doing with Fenty, or even the Museum of Ice Cream. These are all new brands. They happen to be direct to consumer, but they're all pushing $1 billion. And it's showing you that you can build a brand by fostering communities and being commercially solvent by doing those things. And I think the next decacorns and then will be the companies that have a combination of all of those C's.
It's a nice strategy, I think. Can you let's talk a little bit about I don't know if the Blood Normal or the campaign is your favorite one, but do you have the campaign that you worked with, or you were the strategist on? And can you maybe go from the start, step by step, telling us how it's worked out? And this must be the campaign that you really love, like you're proud of it. And the client at the end said, wow, like, yeah, that's what we wanted. Can you do this?
Yeah, I mean, I talked a little bit about the Blood Normal one, but I'll go to one that I did in the States a little bit more of, which is has all those 4 C's in it, which is a campaign for a brand named Honey Maid in the States, which is a 100-year-old brand that basically was irrelevant to a new audience. And this is a time when gay marriage was quite controversial. And so when we looked at that brand, what we started to see was that the question we needed to answer was not necessarily about selling things. It was really about defining wholesome for a new generation of people. And so when you start to think about what is wholesome, you have to start to look at the family structure. And so what was wholesome 100 years ago doesn't look wholesome today, right? So you can have intergenerational families living together. You have gay families. You have blended families. So, divorced and then now new families. You have sometimes teens taking care of teens. And so we really start to look at the structure of society and to understand what wholesome is. It really means that no matter what it looks like wholesome is still wholesome. And so in order to highlight this feature, we started to tell a story about how our point of view of wholesome was there, which featured an ad campaign, which was broadcast on TV, showing 2 dads who had children, and they're actually quite conservative and they're quite normal. They just happen to be 2 dads who were married to each other. And then you put that along with the other different blended families, you have a conversation about it. I think the magic about that campaign is that if you use social media, you can begin to say that that's kind of a controversial point of view for a large consumer packaged goods or a fast moving company. And if you have a point of view like that, a lot of people won't like it. And you should be ready for the backlash. And so what I was doing as looking at the social media was like tracking these conversations with our analytics team and then saying, you know what, I bet you if we say this one thing, they're going to say these sort of 5 to 8 different topics that they're going to talk about, and they're going to come at us hard. And then we talked about where our creative teams, and we're like, you know what we should do? We should come up with a creative response to that before we even go out, because we know there's going to be all this negative hate. And so what we did was come up with creative pieces of work that once we got hate on the Facebook pages and the ads and the YouTube, we can then sort of respond with a beautiful piece of work. So we commissioned 2 artists, and we sort of rented a warehouse, and we printed out all of the positive and negative comments. And the artists rolled them up in our warehouse and spelt the word love out of those hateful terms. And then we surrounded it with all the other positive things. And we released that piece of content to the world. And that actually became much more conversation worthy than the original piece of content that was broadcast on TV. And so like for me, why that piece of work was important is one, I think it was one of the earliest examples of showing premeditated creative against like negative backlash. The second was it really then made a difference in people's lives. And I think at some level it contributed to sort of the legalization of gay marriage in the States at some points, which is controversial, but you know, people are people and love is love. Hardly people can find a date today. If you can find someone that loves you, like, oh man, I applaud you, right? And so that sort of like began to shine a light on a topic that started a conversation. All we want to do is start a conversation, share a point of view, and hope that other people came along on that journey. And at the end, sales would follow, and which I believe it did, and it became one of the most successful campaigns there, the most talked about during that time on the internet worldwide, and it became a traveling art exhibit. So there was some real tangible outcomes from that piece of work.
Man, that sounds really awesome. I mean, you not only changed the consumer's point of view, but the point of view of a lot of people who didn't even maybe go to, let's say, this place, and they are now definitely going and buying products there, and they're thinking that this place is what they need, let's say.
Yeah.
It was this campaign was not like it was previous times, but right now, do you have any special project that you are working on, and maybe you can share it with us?
Yeah, I think, you know, what's important, I think, is to like keep your pencil sharp, right? And while you might be at home and things might slow down, is to what are the things that are interesting to you? And so for me, I really am interested in the arts, and I think my personal mission is to like use creativity to move humanity. And I think part of that is getting other people interested in the creative world. And so as my side projects, I kind of help consult with different organizations. So I've been working with the Victoria and Albert Museum, otherwise known as the V&A, which is sort of an institution in itself. It's a beautiful building in Knightsbridge, a Tony part of town. And they've never actually ever closed their doors, not even during World War II. But for the first time in their history, their doors are closed. And so they're going through a tough time, right? Like, how do you have a museum that people cannot experience? But also, they have some of the most amazing pieces of artwork in their storage. And it's like an iceberg. At some level, what you're only seeing is 30% on the floor of what they have in storage. And so how do you take that brand and get it to more people, not just in London, but across the world? So that's like an interesting project that I'm interested in, working with other things like the Young Vic, which is a theater group. So those are the things that are energizing me, and meeting new people in different realms and solving interesting problems, which I think is always fun. It's why we got into this business in the first place.
Well, so that sounds great. And as a freelance consultant, you can now choose any brand and any let's say clients that you would like to work with. That's one of the best things in this.
I think so, but I think even more is like, well, you can choose, but also I think you're not limited to the output of what the agency does, right? So I think like I worked in PR. Like, what we did was communications. I worked in digital, like we made websites and apps. Advertising, you're going to make a TV spot or a print ad. What if you didn't have to like be limited by those parameters? What if you could do anything? And that's what I think is really exciting.
Sounds awesome, really. There is a limitless kind of things that you can do, and that's what's going to drive you, and that's what's going to drive people after the COVID, I think. I hope.
Yeah, exactly.
And can you maybe share what are your future plans career-wise, let's say? I mean, you just told that you are working with the projects more connected with culture and arts, but how do you see yourself, let's say, I don't know, in 5-10 years? I know that right now it's stupid to ask this question because you never know what's going to happen even in 5 days, but still, we can fantasize, we can see ourselves, we can aim to something. What are you aiming for?
Yeah, well, I don't really tend to look that far in the future because of everything you just said is that things change too quickly. I think even when Bob used to talk about RJ, they would change that company every 9 years because that was necessarily the cycle of innovation. And those cycles have gotten shorter and shorter. And so the world is changing at a pace that's faster and faster than ever. But I think it's a little bit about what I've hinted at is that I'd like to be channel agnostic in terms of types of the terms of projects and work that I could do. And like, I think that would be the future is how can you take the sort of the expertise that we've learned within the advertising world in terms of how do you build a brand, come up with ambition, and how can people experience that ambition? And I think we can open much more doors there. So it'll be such more of an interesting world post-COVID.
Yeah, I think that COVID will actually change the whole humanity, but it's so hard to predict in what way. I mean, can you say what's going to be the changes in the cultural way? Are there any, I don't know, predictions from your side?
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard. Anyone that would say that they know the answer to that question, I would say that they have a crystal ball, and they're drinking a little bit too much of whatever's in their cup at the moment. But I'd say like what COVID will do is it's the fastest driver of innovation than anybody who is innovation right now, right? And so we almost have to instead of like putting down others, put ourselves in people's place, right? And I think like what COVID helps us to do is to actually like be much more empathetic about how people are experiencing the world, but also like what the world needs. And so I don't know the answer to that, but all I'd say is if we can begin to think differently about what we're doing now, we can make much faster changes.
Oh yeah, I totally agree with you. I'd like to ask you to give maybe some advices for the brands or persons after the COVID, because I know that it's hard to make any prognosis now, and we are all in this type of uncertainty times. But what would you suggest a brand to do right now? Let's say a huge brand with huge ambitions.
Yeah. Well, one, I'd say like there's just so many levels to this question. Like one is to really look at how they're operating, right? At some level, you'd say that you had to like be in close proximity with the people that you're working with, the agencies that you're partnering with, all of your creative partners. But what we're seeing now, actually, like it's completely not true. We can be just as efficient and maybe even have better output while we are working from our respective places. And so I think, you know, the idea of collaboration is fundamentally going to change how we work together to come up with executing ideas. But if you think about that, if most people who are living not in city centers where big companies are, what does that mean for transportation, right? And so you can see cities themselves changing. And so if people are not commuting to city centers, what does it mean to be a city center in the first place? So you can see structural changes for society in general of what that looks like. And I think, you know, what is the role of a brand in a place where there is no city center? That's a quite interesting and meaty question that has lots of different implications, right? So you can think about suburban areas being much more, because they're much more affordable. People are not going into city centers anymore. They're working from home in the comfort of their nice places. So how do you advertise to those people if they're not driving anymore, or they're not taking long commutes? Or what are the types of information that they need? What does the structurally a suburb look like? Is it walkable? What is that? What is that? What's the role of a car, right? Do we even need cars in that sense, because you're now walking everywhere? So I think those are not necessarily brand questions, but they're structural society questions, which then brands can have a role in. And I think those are the types of questions that we should be really exploring at the moment.
You talked about the let's say changing of the structure of the brand and people working in the brand and people working from home more. Do you think that it will change also the creative side of the process? Do you think that let's say the creative agencies or brands will be outstaffing, using outstaffing model more? Will the COVID change the idea of creativity, let's say?
Yeah, I think the beautiful thing about I think advertising is probably the wrong word, right? Like, I'm not necessarily in it to work in advertising. I'm in it to use creativity, and to leverage creativity on behalf of brands. And I think I was doing the judging for DNAD, and they have their New Blood Awards, which is for sort of the next generation of upcoming talent. We're chatting to some of the judges, and they were saying, you know what? Actually, the creative output is so much better than it was before, because now we have deep thinking time and we can actually be technically more efficient than we were before. And I think what is harder is when you have thinking time. You have less thinking time because you're constantly talking to other people and you're on meetings, and you need to begin to carve out your own time for that thinking time, which a lot of people tend to like step all over your calendars, right? Like, oh no, yeah, you can just join. And so like how we work and structure our days, remember the 9 to 5 was based on industrialization because we're working in factories. But when we no longer work in factories, do we need the 9 to 5 anymore? And I think that's like a big question that perhaps is COVID is an impetus to changing, and we can evolve from that.
Well, we'll see how it goes. I think I've never been working 9 to 5. I mean,
really?
When I started this job, there was always from 10 to 10 or from 12 to 12. You never know. It can be all day and all night long.
Oh my God, yeah. Well, you look good for like someone who's working all the time, you know? Yeah.
No, I don't want to see that. I don't want to see it like the, let's say a person has now to work more because he doesn't have like hours of commute or hours of meetings or something like this. I think that you just can now decide at what point of the day, at what time of the day you are more productive. If you can do it in the morning, what was when it was the time that you spent in the car or on the subway or whatever, and now you can spend it just doing the greatest thing in your life. Why don't you? I mean, that's the great thing of it, of staying at home.
Exactly.
Okay, we are, I think, coming to the end of our talk, and there is one more question, or it's more a suggestion to you that I would ask. Can you maybe say some inspiring stuff for everybody who is listening to us right now? I don't know, career-wise or life-wise, or any advice that would inspire people in, let's say, next point of their life?
Yeah. Ooh, that's a lot of pressure there. I'd say if you are not in the sort of, I'm going to call it the creative industries, and you want to get in the creative industries, one, it's great to have a positive outlook on the world, because what a creative person can do is really use their skills to make connections, to make something beautiful. And the things that are most needed right now is the technical ability. You need taste, and in terms of like, what do you like, what do you not like, and then you need sort of teamwork. So you have technical, you have your taste, and then you have your teamwork. The 3 T's. You have those things together, you can inspire others. You can make something great. You can change this world. And I think like anyone who wants to get into this industry, changing the world can be on the agenda, and that's where I'll leave it there. Yeah.
Mic drop.
Yeah. Boom.
So thank you so much for this inspiring talk. As I always say, I hope that I will see you one day in one part of this world, and when we're gonna all travel, and I'll be happy to see you back in Russia, because it was a great pleasure to meet you. And please stay safe and have fun. See you.
Yeah, you as well, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
And